The storm had been building all evening, and by the time Elena Marsh locked up the small animal clinic on the edge of Ashgrove Hollow, rain was falling in heavy sheets. She pulled her coat tight and hurried toward her car, eager to get home before the roads flooded. The town was quiet at this hour, the kind of quiet that made people glance twice at shadows, especially when those shadows fell near the Thornwood Forest. Nobody in Ashgrove Hollow talked much about the forest. Children were warned to stay away from it, and adults simply nodded when the subject came up, changing the topic quickly. Elena had never paid much attention to the old stories. She was a woman of science, a wildlife veterinarian who believed in what she could see, touch, and heal. Wolves, foxes, hawks with broken wings, these were the things she understood. She was halfway to her car when she heard it. A thin, trembling whimper, almost lost beneath the sound of rain hitting the pavement. She stopped and listened. There it was again, coming from the tree line near the parking lot, faint but unmistakable. Elena hesitated only a second before grabbing her flashlight and heading toward the sound. Her boots sank into wet grass as she moved past the last streetlight and into the deeper dark near the trees. The whimpering grew louder, more desperate, and then her flashlight beam caught something small and gray, curled in on itself beneath a fallen branch. It was a wolf cub, or what looked like one. It was young, its fur matted with blood and rain, one of its front legs bent at a wrong angle. Its eyes, when they opened weakly to look at her, seemed almost too knowing for an animal so small. There was something in that gaze that made Elena's chest tighten, though she could not have explained why. She knew the sensible thing to do was walk away. Wild animals did not belong in human hands, and injured predators, however small, could be dangerous. But the cub whimpered again, and its trembling body looked so fragile against the storm that every instinct Elena had built over years of rescuing broken creatures rose up and drowned out her caution. She wrapped the cub gently in her coat and carried it to her car. At home, she worked through the night by lamplight, cleaning the wound on its leg, setting the small bone as carefully as she could, and feeding it warm broth from a dropper when it grew too weak to lift its head. The cub did not fight her the way most injured wild animals did. Instead, it seemed to understand, somehow, that she meant no harm. By the time the storm broke and gray morning light crept through her windows, the cub was sleeping soundly on a blanket near her fireplace, its breathing steady for the first time since she had found it. Elena sat beside it, exhausted but strangely at peace, unaware that half a mile away, in a house deep within Thornwood Forest, the household had erupted into chaos. Cain Ashbourne had not slept. He rarely did on nights when he could not account for every person under his protection, and tonight, his young son Torrin was missing. Cain was not a man used to fear. Those who spoke of him in town, when they dared speak of him at all, used words like ruthless and untouchable. He had built his position through discipline and unwavering control, and few crossed him twice, but none of that mattered now, not when his son's scent had vanished into the storm somewhere near the edge of human territory. By dawn, his most trusted men had traced Torrin's trail through the mud, past the tree line, into the parking lot behind the town's small animal clinic, and finally to a modest cottage on Birch Lane. Cain arrived within the hour, his expression carved from stone, his men flanking him in tense silence. He did not knock, he did not need to. The door was pushed open, and Elena, still in yesterday's clothes, turned from the fireplace to find a group of unfamiliar men standing in her living room, led by someone whose presence alone seemed to make the air feel heavier. Her first instinct was fear. Her second was to place herself between the strangers and the sleeping cub curled by the fire. "You need to leave," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is my home." The man in front did not answer at first. His eyes had gone past her, fixed instead on the small gray form near the fireplace. Something shifted in his face, a crack in the composure he clearly worked hard to maintain. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the cub, his large hand hovering over it as though afraid to touch something so fragile. The cub stirred, opened its eyes, and let out a soft sound that was almost relief. "Torrin," the man whispered. Elena watched, confused, as the cub pressed its small head into the man's palm. Whatever tension had filled the room a moment ago dissolved into something quieter, something raw. She did not understand what she was witnessing, only that the fierce stranger kneeling on her floor looked, for a moment, entirely undone. When he finally looked up at her, his expression had changed again, guarded now, unreadable. "Who are you?" he asked. "And what did you do to him?" "I found him in the woods last night," Elena said. "His leg was broken. He was bleeding. I did what anyone would do. I brought him inside and treated his wounds." The man studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something far heavier than her simple explanation. "You have no idea what you have done," he finally said, though his voice held no anger, only something closer to disbelief. Elena did not understand until later that day, when the man who introduced himself only as Cain sat across from her at her own kitchen table and explained, carefully and without embellishment, what she had stumbled into. He told her about the pack, about bloodlines and old laws, about a world hidden just beyond the town she had lived in her whole life. He told her that the cub she had saved was his son, and that by human custom, tradition demanded her silence be permanent, in the harshest sense of the word. Elena sat frozen through most of it, torn between disbelief and the plain evidence sitting curled and healing in her living room. When Cain finished speaking, she found her voice again. "If your law says I should be punished for saving a child," she said quietly, "then your law is wrong." Something flickered behind Cain's eyes at that, something she could not name. He was silent for a long moment before he spoke again. "You saved my son's life," he said. "That changes things. I will not allow harm to come to you. Instead, I am placing you under the pack's protection and naming you Torin's guardian, for as long as the life debt remains unpaid." Elena did not fully understand what that meant, not yet. She would learn quickly enough that in Cain's world, a title like that came with expectations, dangers, and a spotlight she had never asked for. The weeks that followed tested her in ways she had not expected. She was welcomed into a world she barely understood, watched constantly by pack members who did not trust an outsider, especially a human one, holding such an unusual position. Some regarded her with quiet suspicion, others with open hostility, certain that her closeness to the Alpha King's son was somehow a threat to the order they had built their lives around. Torin, however, trusted her completely from the very first night, and his trust never wavered. He was a bright, curious boy who healed quickly under her care, and he began following her almost everywhere, delighted by the ordinary human things she taught him, from tying shoelaces to identifying birds by their calls. Elena found herself growing fond of him in a way she had not expected, a fondness that felt less like duty and more like family. Cain, too, changed in ways neither of them acknowledged openly. He began arriving at odd hours, ostensibly to check on his son, though his visits grew longer, his conversations with Elena stretching late into the evening. He was not the ruthless figure the town whispered about, not entirely. With her, he was thoughtful, careful, sometimes even hesitant, as though he were relearning how to speak to another person, without command or calculation. Elena noticed it too, though she told herself it did not matter. She was human. He was the leader of a world she barely understood, bound by traditions and responsibilities far beyond her control. Whatever warmth grew between them, she reasoned, could not last. But warmth, once it takes root, is difficult to ignore. Trouble arrived on a clear autumn evening, when scouts reported movement near the northern border, unfamiliar scents crossing into pack territory. A rival pack, sensing an opportunity in what they believed was a weakened alpha, distracted by matters of the heart rather than matters of strength, had grown bold enough to test Cain's control. Elena was at the main house that evening, helping Torin with his reading, when the first alarm sounded. Chaos broke out quickly, pack members rushing to defend the grounds, voices raised in warning. Cain appeared within moments, his calm demeanor replaced by sharp, controlled urgency as he issued orders to secure the boy. But the attackers moved faster than expected, slipping past the outer guards, their focus narrowing on the one target that would wound Cain most deeply, his son. Elena did not think. She simply acted, pulling Torin behind her and pressing them both into the corner of the room as the door burst open. She had no claws, no strength to match what stood before her, only the fierce determination of someone who refused to let harm reach the child in her arms. The confrontation lasted only seconds before Cain arrived, moving with a speed and ferocity Elena had never witnessed, driving the intruder back and ending the threat before it could reach either of them. When the danger had passed, he turned to find Elena still shielding his son, her arms trembling but unmoving, her body positioned between Torin and whatever danger might still remain. Cain crossed the room and knelt before her, his hand resting gently over hers where it still held his son close. "You could have been killed," he said, his voice rough. "So could he," Elena answered simply. "I was not going to let that happen." In that moment, something between them settled into place, quiet and certain, the kind of understanding that did not need further words. Cain rose slowly, drawing both Elena and Torin into a rare, unguarded embrace, and for the first time since she had found the injured cub in the storm, Elena felt something she had not expected to feel in this strange new world, that she belonged. The days following the attack brought quick and decisive action. Cain addressed the rival pack's aggression directly, restoring order and making clear, without ambiguity, that any further threat to his territory or his family would not be tolerated. His authority, rather than weakening, grew firmer, the pack rallying behind a leader whose strength had been proven not only in battle but in loyalty. Weeks later, beneath the same trees where Elena had once found a wounded cub crying in the storm, Cain called his pack together. Torin stood beside him, fully healed and grinning, as Cain took Elena's hand in front of everyone gathered. "This woman saved my son when she owed him nothing," Cain said, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd. "She stood between him and danger when she could have run. She has earned more than gratitude. She has earned her place among us, not as an outsider, not as a guardian bound by debt, but as my chosen mate, and as this pack's future Luna." A murmur of approval rippled through the gathering, quiet at first, then growing into something warmer, something like acceptance. Elena looked at Cain, then down at Torin, who was beaming up at her with the same trust he had shown her that very first night, and felt her heart settle into a certainty she had never expected to find. She had only meant to save a dying cub from the storm. She never imagined it would lead her here, standing beside the most feared Alpha King alive, no longer as a stranger to his world, but as its newest and most cherished part. The storm that had once brought them together had long since passed, but what it left behind endured, steady and unshaken, like roots grown deep into the earth.